ladies and gentlemen. We are so happy to see so many of you out this evening for our lecture. Okay. So before we begin with our program, we have a very important presentation to make. I know that all of you have seen our amazing volunteers who help in so many ways to keep our organization going, but there are so many of you that help, that are from the community. You have volunteered your consultant time, you have volunteered just in a lot of ways in helping us as we have grown and as we have restructured our organization. And we are here this evening to recognize one of the individuals who has contributed and from your recommendations. So I'm just going to read what you all wrote. So the person we are recognizing this evening has provided numerous presentations for the public on the history of nuclear weapons and the programs at LANO. This has provided an understanding and a history of these programs to the community. Another individual wrote, this person has an amazing way of speaking for the public, telling the history of the Manhattan Project. It is done with humor, passionate interest, has a wide base of knowledge, and this year, this information has been shared in so many ways. At the J. Robert Oppenheimer seminars, at MOWW, at the Historical Society, LANO, and the Santa Fe World Affairs Forum. These are only a few of the places this individual has shared our history. This individual also always has time for the Historical Society to research and answer questions. That's because this individual has the world's most amazing Rolodex of contacts, and if he doesn't know the answer, he knows someone who knows someone who knows someone with the answer. It is my pleasure to present the 2022 Los Alamos Historical Society History Award to Alan B. Carr. There was only one way I could get him here this evening, with some tiramisu. Congratulations. We appreciate everything you do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bruce is a pretty good draw to this. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. So, Sarah, if I can have your assistance. This year, our lecture series, we have been looking at the neighbors that surrounded J. Robert Oppenheimer and his family, and how those individuals have played into different parts of his life and decisions that were made. So just a little review. Okay, so the Oppenheimer house is here, and the first month, Alan did our presentation, and he talked about the British mission, and the British mission lived in the chief mechanic's house. And then last month, we had the spy presentation, and we heard about Klaus Fuchs, one of the most famous spies. Klaus would babysit for Deeks Parson, just right across the road from the Oppenheimers. He also babysat at Robert Bacher, and at that time, he had moved into the chief mechanic's house. And it just so happened that he lived in the big house, so very close to the neighborhood. This evening, I'm not sure who Bruce is going to talk about, but there were a lot of people that either testified at the hearings, wrote letters, definitely people that played an important role in that whole process. So once again, Oppenheimer House, next door is where Edwin McMillan lived, and then when they left after the war, Hans Beta moved into that house. The Spruce Cottage, the stone part of the house is where Stan Ulam lived, and the original part of the house is where Fermi lived. Up in the big house is where Robbie and other guest scientists would come that did not stay here permanently. They were in that house. Somewhere up in this area, I'm not sure where, the brand new Summit quads were built, and in one of those is where Edward Teller lived. And of course, our last character, General Groves at the guest house. So again, a lot of the important people that played an important role in the hearings lived in the neighborhood. So at this time, I am going to give the microphone over to our amazing executive director, Todd Nichols, who is going to introduce our speaker for this evening.
Hi everybody, welcome tonight. Definitely glad to have you. Congratulations, Alan. Again. So, Bruce has quite a list of accolades, and I'm going to just kind of read through them because I did not get them all memorized. So, Bruce Held was Associate Deputy Secretary of Energy, as well as Acting Administrator of the National Nuclear Security Administration during 2013 through 2014. He had oversight responsibility for America's nuclear weapons complex, including Los Alamos. Prior to the Energy Department, Bruce served 3 decades as a CIA clandestine operations officer, including tours as a CIA Chief of Station in Asia, Latin America, and Africa, as well as Special Assistant to CIA Director George Tenet. He received the CIA Intelligence Commendation Medal for tenacity and extraordinary accomplishments during the period of hostilities. Bruce writes A Spy's Guide to American History, which is free at bruceheld.substack.com. And if you guys want that address, let me know and I'll let you know. One thing I do know about Bruce is he does like oven roasted things more than sort of plant roasted. So let's give it up for Bruce Held right now.
Thank you very much. I'm an old counterintelligence guy, and so to be in Fuller Lodge, footsteps from J. Robert Oppenheimer's home is really a tremendous honor. It's just a tremendous honor, and so I want to thank you for that. I will do a quick excuse. The high altitude air here in Los Alamos is really doing a job on me, so I may cough and get short of breath a little bit, so I apologize for that. And then finally, congratulations, Alan. With all the history now known, the 1995 declassification of the Venona project, and the 2014 declassification of the final bits of the Oppenheimer hearings survey, our security meetings, we can now say with unequivocal certainty that Oppenheimer was a great man and he was a loyal American. He was a complex man, though. And he was not blameless for the events that led to the security review. Nonetheless, a number of us have, over the last 12 years at least, that I've been working on it, have tried to get the government to vacate the AEC Security Commission report or Security Commission report on against Oppenheimer, his revocation of his security clearance. Now, vacate means you cannot give a security clearance back to someone who's passed away. Vacate means that it just didn't happen, just wipes it clean. And so that's what we've been trying to do for 12 years. And with this release of the film next year, named Oppenheimer, it's based on Kai Bird's book, American Prometheus, I hope we may be on the verge of getting that vacated and will ultimately clarify the legacy of Robert Oppenheimer. So the plan for this evening will be, one, I'll survey Oppenheimer's personal history from the late 1930s through 1953, as people generally know it, and people at the time generally knew it. I will then layer on what a very select group of people knew about J. Robert Oppenheimer, because they knew about the Venona project of encrypted, decrypted KGB or Soviet intelligence cables. Then I'll touch on the highlights of the 54 decision itself, key points of the decision itself. And then I'll touch on the two previous efforts to rehabilitate Oppenheimer's reputation. You don't need to rehabilitate Oppenheimer, you need to rehabilitate his reputation. That was in 1963 with President Kennedy, and in 2017 with Energy Secretary Moniz. Okay, so the late 1930s through 1953. It's no secret to anybody that Oppenheimer was a leftist. It was a source of great frustration to Joseph Stalin that they couldn't recruit Oppenheimer as being a spy, because he was surrounded by communists. His wife, his brother, his mistress were all former Communist Party members. His best friend, Haakon Chevalier, was a Communist Party member and probably an agent of the Soviet intelligence. In 1942, Chevalier probed Oppenheimer to provide secret reporting on the Manhattan Project to Soviet intelligence. Oppenheimer flatly refused. He said that would be treason. I'm not going to do that. He did prevaricate in reporting this malicious intelligence approach to the responsible security officers. And the responsible security officers were not happy about it. Leslie Groves sensed that Oppenheimer was key to the success of the Manhattan Project, no matter what his background was. But he insisted that Oppenheimer explain the Chevalier incident, what became known as the Chevalier incident. So Oppenheimer did so to Groves, personally to Groves. And so Groves, over the objections of all the security officers at Los Alamos, approved the security clearance for Dr. Oppenheimer, with the caveat that he would, every time he left Los Alamos, he would leave with about 6, 10, 15 FBI agents in trail. And so Los Alamos was effectively his prison. The Manhattan Project proved a huge success, and Oppenheimer was instrumental in that success. The atomic bomb, explosion of the 2 atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki is estimated to have saved 1 million American lives that would have been lost had we had to invade Japan. 1 million lives. So Oppenheimer was a national hero until August 29, 1949. And that's when the Soviets blew up took the world completely by surprise and exploded the bomb, the Russian bomb. In January 1950, President Truman, after the August explosion of the Soviet bomb, President Truman authorized work to proceed on the on the thermonuclear weapon. This was disregarding advice that he received from Oppenheimer that this would be immoral to do it. Not only immoral, but unnecessary. And from that point on, Oppenheimer had his security clearance, but he was kind of shunted aside. And he retreated to Princeton. At this very same moment, Hakon Chevalier, because it was the McCarthy period, lost his job at UC Berkeley and emigrated to France. On his way there, he hadn't seen Oppenheimer since the Manhattan Project days. So on his way to France, he stopped by Princeton and was a guest at Oppenheimer's house for about a week. This raised a lot of eyebrows in the FBI, a lot of eyebrows. And the FBI suspected that Oppenheimer was mad at President Truman and might have been tempted to reveal secret information about the U.S. nuclear weapons program to Chevalier for passage to the KGB, or passage to Soviet intelligence. So that was in mid-1950. In November 1952, the United States exploded its first nuclear weapon. It was the Teller-Ulam design, very efficient design. In August 1953, the first Soviet nuclear test took place, and it was a less effective layer cake design. And in the midst of all of this, so in 1953, the Soviets have their nuclear weapon. In the midst of all this, Oppenheimer goes to France in December of 1953 and visits Hakon Chevalier. This was a monumentally stupid thing to do for a very brilliant man. You're in all this controversy. The Soviets have exploded their first atomic bomb. Then we respond by exploding a nuclear bomb. Then they explode their nuclear bomb, but it's a less efficient design. It's probably the time you don't want to go see your friend Hakon Chevalier, but he did. Even Henry Smythe, the AEC commissioner most sympathetic to Oppenheimer, wrote that it was unwise of Oppenheimer to meet with someone who tried to recruit him as a spy for Soviet intelligence. So we'll stop there for a minute, and then we'll talk about the Venona project. How many of you here have ever heard of the Venona project? You're a Los Alamos group. So I will typically ask that, and they haven't, not a soul, or maybe one person. So, okay, so in 1944-45, the Soviets in New York City were running 5 spies in Los Alamos, including Klaus Fuchs. The FBI and U.S. Army were keeping the transcripts of Soviet intelligence in New York to Soviet intelligence Moscow cables. But the cables were encrypted, so we couldn't read them. In late 1949, we broke the encryption code, and thus we could read them. And that's what led to, first to Klaus Fuchs, then to Harry Gold, then to David Greenglass, then to the Rosenbergs. We also knew about Ted Hall. We tried to brace Ted Hall to get him to confess, but he wouldn't confess. We could have convicted him, but we would have had to reveal the Venona secret. So by mid-1950, the FBI, because of the Venona secret, the top secret Venona secret, or Venona transcripts, knew everything about spying, Soviet spying in Los Alamos. We knew it all. We knew when, we knew what they knew and when they knew it. We knew the names, 4 of the spies. We knew the identity, or well, we didn't know the identity, but we could picture who the 5th person was, and it was not Oppenheimer. Totally different. If Oppenheimer had been a spy, they would have known, the Soviets would have known much more, much faster than they did, and we know it. So we were certain of that. The Venona secret was top secret, though. It was so secret that J. Edgar Hoover at the FBI and General Omar Bradley of the United States Army refused to reveal it to President Harry Truman because they didn't trust Truman. Think about that. So, from Venona, the FBI had compelling proof, absolute proof, that Oppenheimer was loyal to the United States through 1949. No question. The thing about counterintelligence people, of which I am one, is that we have an incredible difficulty once we've kind of reached a conclusion about somebody. And once we've gotten convinced ourselves that somebody is a spy, it's really hard. It's really, really hard to convince yourself to look at the proof that's in front of you and say, I was wrong. I was just wrong. And that's what happened with J. Edgar Hoover. So between 1950 and 1953, the FBI still harbored suspicions about Oppenheimer's continued loyalty because of Chevalier, because of his contact with Chevalier. But we had absolutely no proof of it. No proof whatsoever. And the last thing about the Venona project, nobody involved at the AEC, nobody involved in the hearings had any idea that it even existed. So they knew nothing. Okay, we'll go to the 54 decision itself. The AEC chairman, Louis Strauss, detested Oppenheimer. In late December 1953, okay, remember, on early December 1953, Oppenheimer sees Hakon Chevalier in Paris. That meeting was surveilled by French intelligence. French intelligence immediately reported it to the FBI. So J. Edgar Hoover told Louis Strauss about it, and less than a week later, Louis Strauss suspended Oppenheimer's security clearance, suspended it. Now, Oppenheimer had been shunted aside for the past 3 years, the previous 3 years. So he went to Strauss, or went to the AEC, and said, look, I'm willing to have my security clearance lapse. I'm reluctant to have my security clearance actually revoked, because that would say that I did something wrong, that I was disloyal to the United States, and I won't do that. You can say you don't need my advice anymore, which they had not been taking its advice, and let it lapse, let it go away, that's fine. But if you're going to revoke it, I'm going to fight it. The security hearings began on April 12th, 1954, ran 4 weeks. Much of the time was spent rehashing Oppenheimer's experience in the late 1930s, which was totally irrelevant because of they didn't know it was totally irrelevant, but it was. The real issue was the possibility that Oppenheimer might have said something to Chevalier in December of 1953 about the nuclear program. Remember, this was after the Soviets did not know about the Teller-Ulam design. They were working on the layer cake design, which is less efficient. And then 2 years later, they exploded a thermonuclear device using the Teller-Ulam design. So somehow they learned about it in between. And the suspicion, now I will get back to how they learned it. But the FBI suspicion was maybe Oppenheimer said something to Chevalier in December 53. Oppenheimer's security clearance was revoked June 29th, 1954, 1 day before it was set to expire. 1 day. The reason they wanted to revoke it was because they wanted to destroy, and this is written in the letter of revocation. They wanted to destroy his credibility to do any consulting with the government for once and for all, destroy it. So the revocation letter makes no direct allegation of disloyalty, since they had no proof. And J. Edgar Hoover knew that they had no proof. Instead, it focuses on his associations. And I quote, "His associations with persons known to him to be communist have extended far beyond the tolerable limits of prudence and self-restraint, which are expected of one holding the highest positions that the government has continuously entrusted to him since 1942. That statement is in fact true. However, the revocation letter goes on to insinuate, quote, "These associations have lasted too long to be justified as merely the intermittent and accidental revival of earlier friendships," unquote. What that sentence is saying, it's raising the specter of disloyalty. It's saying the word spy without actually saying it, and without providing any proof whatsoever, of which they had none. So, based on these facts, my conclusion is, one, the AEC was justified in its concern about Oppenheimer's association with Chevalier during 1959 and 1953, or during 1950 to 53, and could have justified their termination of his security clearance. It was a huge, huge mistake, though, for the AEC to reject Oppenheimer's suggestion that his security clearance lapsed. When you're in a situation like this, you want to terminate, from my counterintelligence background, you want to terminate the problem amicably, because you may really piss the guy off if you terminate his clearance one day before it is set to expire anyways, and he may then go commit espionage. So, repeat, my conclusion is the AEC was justified in its concern, but it was a huge mistake to reject Oppenheimer's willing, amicable suggestion that his security, to allow his security clearance to lapse. There have been any number of efforts to correct the record on this thing. The first was with President Kennedy. President Kennedy, after he was briefed on the still top secret Venona project, asked the CIA, who he trusted more than he trusted the FBI. He didn't like J. Edgar Hoover. He liked James Jesus Angleton, who was a CIA, who was the counterintelligence guy at CIA. He asked the CIA for an assessment on whether the Rosenbergs or Oppenheimer were spies. The CIA came back to him and said, one, the Rosenbergs are spies beyond a shadow of a doubt. They were actually relatively marginal spies in terms of atomic espionage, but they were spies. And they actually did more in spying against radar than they did. The impact of what they did was more important on radar. As far as Oppenheimer was concerned, he had questionable associations with communists, but was unquestionably loyal to the United States through 1949. And there was no proof of any disloyalty afterwards, from 1949 to 1950. No proof at all. As a result, President Kennedy honored Oppenheimer with the 1963 Fermi Award, but did not restore his security clearance. Did not restore his security clearance. In 2017, the 63 thing still leaves a hint of disloyalty, just a hint of disloyalty. In 2017, Energy Secretary Moniz created the Oppenheimer Science and Energy Leadership Program. It's still going, it's a very vibrant program. In so doing, Moniz unambiguously addressed the loyalty question, and I quote, "In making this designation, we fully acknowledge the controversy surrounding Dr. Oppenheimer's security clearance. He was not blameless, but Oppenheimer was never disloyal." That last sentence means something to me, because I insisted that Ernie put that in. With the movie coming out next year, I hope we can put this matter to rest, clarify, vacate the decision. That is not totally letting Oppenheimer off the hook, because he did do some monumentally stupid things. But it puts to rest any and all question about disloyalty. There was plenty of evidence that Oppenheimer was a great and loyal American. nobody has ever produced any evidence that he was disloyal. And in these American, I get emotional about this thing, I'm sorry. And in these United States, we are innocent until proven guilty, unless proven guilty. So that's my talk. I'd be happy to take questions.
Was Oppenheimer's phone wiretapped and his house bugged by the FBI?
Oppenheimer was the most heavily surveilled person in the United States for this whole time. When he was in Los Alamos, he lived with FBI agents. When he traveled with FBI agents, after he went to Princeton, his phone was bugged, and so he was the most heavily watched person in the world. It really upset, that's what caused great upset when he met with Haakon Chevalier in Paris, because the United States didn't have that capability in Paris. Please.
I kind of assume that Dr. Oppenheimer died before information about the Venona project came out. So he never knew that there was no proof in that report?
Yes, that is true. It's an interesting thing about the Venona project. It's interesting, shows a weakness of counterintelligence people, of which I am one. The Venona, okay, we had, Soviets had 5 spies here in Los Alamos from 45 to 44 to 45. We discovered that the Americans discovered that the Soviets had 5 spies in Los Alamos in late 1949. About a day after, the Soviets discovered that we had discovered that there were spies in the zone, because the person we told in the British government was Kim Philby. Kim Philby was the liaison officer, and so Kim Philby, British intelligence liaison officer in Washington. So we tell Kim Philby, hey, Klaus Spooks is a spy. Klaus Spooks was working in England at the time. Philby first tells the Soviets, and then tells the British. So the Soviets know that we know that they have 5 spies in the same day in 1949. We know that the Soviets know that we know that they know. In 1963, when Kim Philby defects to the Soviet Union. So in 1963, there are no secrets. Everybody knows everything amongst the cognoscenti. The Venona project was declassified in 1995. 1995, 32 years later. And it was only declassified because a Russian general named Sudoplatov, who ran all this stuff, all these spies things, wrote a book, propaganda, trying to make people believe that Oppenheimer was a Soviet spy. Because it's so pissed off all the scientists in the United States that the Russians wanted to make a, and so John Deutsch, who was the director of CIA at the time, said, enough, let's declassify Venona. 32 years. Think of all the social debate about the Rosenbergs, about Oppenheimer. So, yes, but he died before.
I read a couple of accounts that maybe Eisenhower was involved in this decision to take away his clearance. Is that true?
Eisenhower was aware of the Venona project. He was briefed. Truman was not briefed. And when Louis Strauss went to Eisenhower and told them about the meeting between Oppenheimer and Chevalier in December of 1953 in Paris, Eisenhower said, put a blank wall between you and Oppenheimer. And so Strauss then suspended his clearance, and that's when it goes back. So that's about as much as Eisenhower was involved in that sense. But that was a perfectly legitimate thing for Eisenhower to do. Perfectly legitimate.
Can you say how the Soviets went from their layer cake design and their own design to the Ulam design, Ulam concept?
Okay. Intelligence and counterintelligence is full of uncertainty. Maybe Oppenheimer told Chevalier how to do it. Okay. I don't believe that, but maybe he did. So that's one thing. What Sakharov said is that Sakharov was a Soviet weapons designer, most famous designer. He said that from the explosion of Ivy Mike, which was the first U.S. nuclear explosion, and Soviet collection of stuff beyond my technical capability, but you can collect the stuff downstream from the bomb, and you can identify that there was a primary and a secondary. That's what Sakharov says, and I don't know if that's true, but that's what Sakharov says. That they figured it out by examining the remains or the detritus of the tests that were done by the U.S. And they had ships, constantly circling around them.
Anyone else?
Over here.
It seems like that spending the night with Gene Tatlock is kind of stupid also, would you say?
So Gene Tatlock was Oppenheimer's mistress, and he spent the night, and dutifully about 12 FBI agents were sitting outside waiting for him. And Oppenheimer told Tatlock that the nature of his responsibilities, he was not going to be able to see her anymore. That night, he told her. She committed suicide some months later, and the Trinity site is named after her. The Trinity site was taken from a poem that the two of them loved, and it's an odd poem, but the Trinity site was named in dedication to Gene Tatlock. They asked during the hearings. And again, remember, all of this is irrelevant because of the Venona project. Whatever he was loyal. But they asked him, what did you talk about with Gene Tatlock on the night that you spent with her on blah, 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 what date it was, and with all these FBI agents. And Oppenheimer quipped, We didn't talk about nuclear weapons.
Wondering, is any historical evidence that Klaus Fuchs and Oppenheimer actually interacted?
Oh, I'm sure they interacted. I don't. Klaus Fuchs was Klaus Fuchs was a very good spy. Was a very good spy, and Klaus Fuchs not only did he babysit and make everybody loved him because he babysat, he became the librarian of the project, or the historian of the project, I think it was. So everything in the project went across Klaus Fuchs' deck. Everything in the project went across Klaus Fuchs' deck. So he was a very, very smart guy. Klaus Fuchs made a huge contribution to the U.S. atomic weapons program. Klaus Fuchs made an equally huge contribution to the Soviet. He made an equally huge contribution to the Chinese. And Klaus Fuchs, when he was in Los Alamos, Klaus Fuchs didn't accept a dime. Not a dime. He did it because he thought he was doing the right thing. In Britain later on, he was being handled by Alexander Feklisov. Alexander Feklisov, this comes to a different story that I gave to the lab on Thursday. Alexander Feklisov handled the Rosenbergs and was the Soviet intermediary to resolve the Cuban Missile Crisis. So, the same guy. He had a huge impact on the. They would have. I was saying about Klaus Fuchs when Feklisov. Fuchs went to Feklisov and said, I know you guys want me to take money so you can blackmail me, but I'm doing this because I want to do it, not because I'm being blackmailed to do it. But my wife would like a dry cleaner or a washing machine. So he took $500 from Feklisov at the time to buy his wife a washing machine.
Can you also say who you think the fifth Manhattan spy was?
The fifth it was four. The fifth just came out and his name slips my mind. I just can't, as I was driving up here, I thought, oh damn, I forgot to look up the guy's name. If you give me a card, I can give it. Just came out like 2 years ago, but does it?
Seaboard.
Seaboard?
No.
Oh, was he? I've got the historian right here. I have never been able to determine. Now, Fuchs and Ted Hall were immensely significant. They passed tremendous information. Was Seaborg or this? Was he relevant or was he very important?
Actually, we're doing some research on that right now. John Earl Haynes and Harvey Clare published the article in 2019.
Yeah.
I think they positively identified him as having committed espionage. The records that they have from the FBI didn't necessarily explain how significant it might have been. And so behind the scenes, I believe the FBI reached out to the AEC reached out to the Library Board, and they were asking Norris Bradbury about Spore in 1955.
Oh yeah, we've known about it for a long time. It just declassed. That's another.
He was a pretty low-ranking soldier, and so me and Ellen, several people here know Ellen, I think we had been scraping those fragments together to try and make a guess about what he would have seen and known during his employment in the laboratory. Hopefully we'll have an article on that in another 6 months or a year, 3.
I am dubious that he was all that significant.
I agree.
Wait, okay.
Fuchs, I think that Fuchs, because he was a manager, theoretically, because he had done some work for Oak Ridge, he understood enrichment of uranium, he understood the hydrodynamics of implosion. I mean, each spy brought something different to the table, but I do think Fuchs was the overwhelming.
Fuchs was trusted by the Soviets as well. Ted Hall actually told the Soviets everything first. He told them it first, but they didn't trust Ted Hall. The Soviets, Ted Hall volunteered, and so the Soviets never trust volunteers. They never trust them. They trust hardcore guys. So Ted Hall was, at least he was not as significant as Fuchs, but he was always first. He always revealed it first. So he was David Greenglass, Rosenberg, Ethel Rosenberg's brother, was not all that significant. The information that Greenglass provided when gold came through, they already had from Fuchs. And they already, I think Fuchs was probably Fuchs, not Hall. The one fellow who is unknown was named Perseus, was codenamed Perseus. If you take what the Russians have said since the fall of in the 1990s, after the wall went down, and they were talking. They aren't talking now. But if you take what they say for granted, the fellow who was Perseus was Louis Slotin. Louis Slotin died a hero on this, and he did the experiment tickling the dragon's tail. It started to go awry, and Slotin covered it with his chest. So if you take what the Soviets or what the Russians say for granted, it was probably Louis Slotin, but he died a hero. He died an absolute hero. It's really fascinating stuff. It's fascinating stuff.
I would subscribe to what they're
Okay.
saying.
How many people knew about Venona in 1949 to 1953?
The CIA did not know about Venona.
The NSA?
It was the predecessor to NSA. It was Army Signal Corps or something like that. And the FBI knew about it. So the FBI and the U.S. Army. But essentially it was NSA, the predecessor to NSA. And it was very tightly held even there. And like I said, they didn't even brief Truman about it. Now, it's funny, they didn't brief Truman about it, but because we informed Kim Philby, Joseph Stalin knew about it, but Harry Truman did not know about it. It's amazing. Any more? Well, thank you very much. Like I said, it's a great honor to be here.